Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And I'm Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, after Elizondo testifies to Congress on November 13th.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely. But even if it's new science and not aliens, woo!
It's a very exciting time.
And a quick reminder before we get into it, if you want to support what we do here, the best way is by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
Mm-hmm. At one point, you were mouthing along with what I was saying. It was reminding me of that YouTube video of the old couple trying to record the ad for this place selling pot pies. And the guy has to say the phrase, baked in a buttery, flaky crust. And he keeps going like, baked in a buttery, crispy flake. And his wife is getting more and more frustrated with him. But Annie and our favorite part of it is they do something like 20 takes. And none of them would be usable, even if he had said the right thing. Because the whole time the wife is in the background going, like mouthing along with what he's supposed to say.
Yeah. So while I was reading the intro, do you realize that it's been like 7 years since that post? This is like kind of crazy. Since the New York Times thing. Yeah.
Covered a lot of times.
A lot of ground.
Yeah, I was talking to Annie. She asked me, like, what's this week's show about? And I have such mixed feelings about it because on the one hand, there's not like one big topic, like last week we got to talk about Immaculate Constellation. Yeah, that was a big story. It was the only thing we really talked about. When David Grush came out, that was all we talked about. Lou Elizondo's book came out. We got several episodes out of that. And sometimes we have an episode like today where I've got a bunch of things to talk about that are all kind of smaller topics. They're all good. I'm excited to talk about them, but there isn't like one thing. And as a content producer now, this concerns me. And I'm worried because I put a lot of effort each week into trying to come up with like a narrative and kind of a through line for how we discuss things to make it kind of a satisfying, organic conversation. And when it's like, we're going to talk about this and then this and then this and then this, it's a little more challenging. But whenever this happens, I have to remind myself that even on the slowest week in 2024, we still have enough like little bits of grab bag news to put together like a 45-minute podcast without really trying very hard.
It's pretty crazy.
When I was a kid growing up in the 80s and the 90s, like desperate for UFO content, my God, we would have nourished ourselves for months on a single Reddit post that today we'll dismiss with barely. Like there was a Reddit post from a whistleblower at the Department of Energy that I decided we weren't going to talk about because it didn't really add anything. And I don't know if it's real or not. And if it's true, it's an interesting kind of like one more straw on the pile in favor of Immaculate Constellation. If it's false, it feels like kind of LARPing, maybe a chat GPT generate. But basically, I didn't need to talk about it this week. We had enough other stuff. I was like, we'll come back to it if something becomes of it. So anyway.
That's wild.
It's a weird time, man. And I try to remind myself, even when I'm kind of like, I don't know what we're going to talk about. There's still plenty to talk about.
Yeah. So can we rewind? Annie is now asking you about UAP news. Like,
I know we joke about Annie being very kind of like hands off with the podcast. Yeah, I mean, our whole sign off thing. But to be fair, Annie is now thrilled that she doesn't have to talk about UFO stuff.
And now she's
not the primary audience. She can opt into it. Of course, like I'm recording a podcast every week, and I think she kind of likes to listen and go like, well, that's not how I would have done it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's
So
cute.
anyway, let's get into it, man. We got
Okay. Yeah,
some good stuff to
let's do
talk
it.
about. The first thing is, I don't know if you remember, but the 2024 NDAA,
Yeah, I
the
remember this.
UAP Disclosure Act did not pass.
Yeah.
But they included this kind of like watered down version of it, right? They stripped out eminent domain, they stripped out the Presidential Review Board.
Mm-hmm.
But what they kept was this law that every government office has to voluntarily turn over any UAP records to the National Archives. There's no enforcement mechanism, but it did have a date. It said you have to turn over the records by October 20th, 2024.
Wait, hang on. That was a week ago.
It was a week
but
ago.
that's like, hang on. That's like super short notice. Didn't they just pass the NDAA?
So the NDAA is kind of like car releases. Like the 2024 NDAA was the one they passed in last year in 2023. The one that they are working on right now is the 2025 NDAA.
Okay, I guess it makes sense because it's like the plan of how they're going to. Okay, so last year's NDAA. Okay, cool. So
but that said, you were right. Like it was a week ago. The deadline they said, which they had a year to do this, was turn over all your UAP records to the National Archives by October 20th. That just happened.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, like did anyone submit stuff? Like, do we get to see things now, or what's the deal?
Well, it's interesting. So two things have happened. One, the National Archives sent out a memo on October 10th telling all the government agencies that they could have an extension, basically. They said you have until September 30th, 2025, although it did request that they transfer materials on a rolling basis as soon as possible. And I think they're like, okay, like the deadline's approaching, and we're worried that you're all going to submit stuff on the last possible minute. So you can have an extension, and please don't give everything on the same day.
Yeah. Okay, so like, do you think they were just getting pushback from agencies? Like this happens to me at work all the time. It's like the deadline comes and we have to plan for the 3 months after the deadline when people actually start working on it.
Yeah. It's hard to say. Yeah, we don't have any visibility into why they posted this extension. But something else did happen, which is the National Archives posted a large collection of new historical UAP reports, including UFO investigations conducted by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations back in the 50s, and a bunch of files from Project Blue Book.
No kidding. Okay. Like, so when the National Archives posts something, does that mean like we get to view it, or is it totally really? That's incredible.
Yeah, all this stuff is up on their website. There's some links in the show notes. But yeah, it's completely available to the public.
Yeah. Have you gone through it? Is there like cool stuff in there?
I skimmed over it. It's new in the sense that the public hasn't seen it. It's not new in the sense that it's all the stuff that we kind of already knew, right? Like the Air Force did investigate UFO sightings, and that's what these documents are. Project Blue Book investigated UFO sightings, and that's what these files are. So we haven't seen these particular files, but there wasn't anything particularly groundbreaking. Now, that said, the thing that's confusing is like, okay, well, are these records that were turned, like, did the Air Force turn over these files as a result of last year's NDAA?
Yeah, they must have, right?
Well, it turns out that these were all records that the National Archives already held before the NDAA passed. They've just made them public now.
Sure, yeah.
Moving forward, they have created a new record group called Record Group 615, which is the UAP Records Collection, which will handle all records turned over as a result of the NDAA, but so far they have not received anything.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a bummer. It makes me wonder if, like, the NDAA is law, but is it enforceable? Are there any teeth behind this? Like, I don't know.
No, that's a very good question. And the short answer is no. There are no teeth behind it. The enforcement mechanism was going to be the Presidential Records Review Board, which was going to have subpoena power. So they could go to these government agencies and say, no, that wasn't a request. Give us all your documents.
Right.
This is now more of a voluntary thing. UFO Klaus on Twitter commented, he said, the fact that the National Archives has received 0 UAP records proves exactly why we need a records review board with subpoena power.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, a law with no enforcement is pretty much just a suggestion, right?
Right. More of a guideline than an actual rule.
Yes, that's perfect.
Switching topics a little bit, we've talked quite a bit about legendary UFO journalist George Knapp and his kind of protege, Jeremy Corbell. They work together a lot. They have a podcast together called Weaponized.
Okay.
And on a recent episode, they were talking about Immaculate Constellation, and they revealed that they have both received death threats and have multiple dead man switches.
Is that specific to Immaculate Constellation, or is that just the outcome of, working in secret land?
Yeah, they're talking about it now in the context of Immaculate Constellation. If you remember, the journalist who brought it up said, if you mention this, you will be under surveillance. Literally just breathing the name of the program was a threat. So that's the context in which Corbell and Knapp were talking about it. But I think it was clear that they already had this in place and they've already known other things that warranted this.
Sure. Okay. All right.
But yeah, let me quote a little bit from their discussion.
Okay. Sure.
Because they were talking about have they met the whistleblower, and they were being very cagey about it. So George Knapp says, is there risk in reporting on this? Is there risk in even knowing information? Is there risk in admitting that you know more that has not been made public yet? And Corbell goes, yeah, I've been notified of very specific and direct and detailed threats against my life, as well as against anybody who may have information, assets, or contact with additional whistleblowers or individuals who are aware of this program. So much so that I have taken action through law enforcement to make sure that they are aware. Now, I didn't put a lot of stock in this, and then I called 4 different people to advise me. And to my shock and awe, I was told to take it 100% deadly serious.
Wow. That's actually super scary. I think I would do the same thing if I was in their shoes, especially the law enforcement. That's a good idea. It's really fortunate that you and I don't know anything of interest to anyone.
Yeah, to be very clear, Chuck and I know nothing. We are no threats.
we may have said this word Immaculate Constellation, but we mess it up probably half the time.
Yeah, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong.
Constellation.
Constellation. So George Knapp continues. He said, do you have in place what you might call a dead switch, a system whereby information about this and other matters that we've collected over the years would be disseminated if something were to happen? And Corbell goes, and I should note, it's worth going and watching this video of the way they're talking about it, because Knapp has a very laid back attitude. This dude has been doing this forever. It is all old hat to him. Nothing is surprising to him. He's a very matter of fact. This is a guy who reported on mafia shit in Las Vegas. He's basically unflappable. Yeah. Corbell is a younger guy. He's a little more hyperbolic, and he tends to kind of take what George says and kind of expand on it and kind of get hyped, right? And they make a fun duo as a result.
Yeah.
The vibe of this discussion was very different. They were sitting together on a couch. Corbell goes, all right, yeah, if we're going to talk about this, let me grab a beer. And okay. He genuinely seemed kind of shook. George, as usual, seemed unflappable. This is not the first death threat George Knapp has received. If they were going to kill him, they would have done it by now.
Yeah. That's super. So do you think George Knapp was so look, really, do you have a dead man switch? Like,
Well, they were kind of playing the game where Jeremy was a little unsure what to say publicly about it. And George is like, okay, look, if we're going to talk about it, like, is it a threat for us to know this? Do you have a dead man switch set up? You know, like he just kind of walked Corbell through okay, talk about this now.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Cool.
he asks about the dead man switch, and Jeremy Corbell says, yeah, I'm not going to mince words. We have had in place for quite some time, unrelated to this story of Immaculate Constellation, that if you or I are removed from the equation, that you have absolute, uncontrolled, catastrophic disclosure of information that would be dangerous to the United States of America, that would be dangerous to global policy, that would be dangerous in many ways. It benefits everybody not to fuck with journalists doing their jobs.
Yeah, good for him. I like that. I will not mince words. Don't fuck with journalists. Yeah,
right?
it makes sense.
He's not putting too fine a point on it.
No, not at all. I like that he like called out to threaten catastrophic disclosure. Like that hits him where it hurts.
Yeah.
I do kind of wonder if it has as much teeth as they think. Like if it was verifiable, they would have released it by now.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But
so
maybe the info they have isn't about UAP, or just like isn't a thing they want to release. I don't know.
I think it is about UAP, but here's the thing. There was a big debate about this on Twitter, and there were people falling down on different sides of this and coming at it from different angles. Some of the people were pissed that Corbell and Knapp have basically just admitted they know more that they haven't told the public. Like, you guys are journalists. You have an obligation to tell us everyone you know. Ross Coulthart and other people are coming out like, that is not how journalism works. It's like, we always know more than we tell you. We come to you with the stuff that we were able to verify, the stuff that we were able to consolidate, and the stuff that had a story attached to it. You know, there are things we know that are verified, that we have good sources out, but there isn't like a hook to hang it on, you know? George Knapp in particular is a little bit legendary for having already known things when they get leaked. For example, when David Grush came out, George Knapp he sounded a little put upon about it. Like, I've known this guy for years, and he goes to other journalists first. And he gets it. Like, George Knapp has a relatively smaller audience. He works for a Las Vegas news channel. He has an internet podcast. He went to, oh my God, why can't I think of their names? The New York Times.
Leslie
Kane and Leslie Kane. Thank you. So he went to the people with connections at the New York Times. He went to Ross Coulthart, who had connections at News Nation. So he was very clear. He's like, I'm not pissed about that, but I do want an exclusive. Like, I sat on this information for years protecting you. And he's done that about a few things now, including he claims he knew about ATIP and all those things early. He's always been big in with the Skinwalker crowd and Bob Bigelow and, Hal Puthoff, these guys who claim to be insiders. So George Knapp has always been very clear that he knows more than he is saying. And some of it he is sitting on as favors to people. It is something that the time may come where it is appropriate to report on it, or he has a source inside government who has told him something, but if he were to publish it, it would burn that source. So they're always kind of holding back on some things that aren't ready yet. And Jeremy Corbell, similarly, has always been very clear that they know more whistleblowers than have gone public. And one of the things they're doing behind the scenes is connecting those whistleblowers with Congress. They would love to publish everything these whistleblowers have to say, but it puts the whistleblowers at risk. It jeopardizes the congressional hearings. So they have been very clear the whole time, like, right now it's time to sit back and work the process. But Corbell especially has been very vocal lately that this shit is coming out one way or another. there's a borderline threat to it of we're trying to let Congress get their shit together, but if they can't,
Yeah.
it's still gonna come out.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So like, I think what you're saying is they have verifiable things that they would release, but they're not as favors or to let people get the right. I think that in our field, in the security community, people who find 0 days will like talk to the vendor first and give them an opportunity to patch it before they post it publicly. I think it's the same kind of
that's a
deal.
really good analogy. And you do see sometimes that they come out and publish a 0 day and they're like, look, I tried to work with the vendor and they were uninterested in fixing it. And it's not safe for this to be unpatched. So I'm publishing it to force their hand.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's definitely Corbell's take here is, yes, we have dead man switches. There's shit we know that would be damaging to the United States. Don't fuck with us, or that shit's coming out in an uncontrolled manner. Right now, we're controlling it.
Right.
And it's worth mentioning that they're not the first ones to mention death threats and dead man switches. We've heard about death threats to Lou Elizondo. We've heard about death threats to David Grush. We've heard about death threats to Lou Elizondo as well. And recently, I quoted this on the show before, but I'm just going to repeat it. Journalist Ross Coulthart has also mentioned that he has a dead man switch. At a conference at one point, he said, and by the way, if anyone ever did decide to push me under a bus, believe me, every name of every person that I've been told, and I haven't been able to verify it all, so I can't publish it, but everything I know would be published by multiple people who have sent copies of what I have all around the world. I'm mindful of the fact that I do know people have been murdered, and that's a big call. I know people have been murdered to protect the secret.
Man, that's wild. So I know that. So I remember hearing this that Ross Coulthart had mentioned his dead man switch before. And I totally believe it. Do you think that this is just like normal prep for when you're a journalist? Like when Erica and I hear about a hurricane, we have a list of steps. Is like building a dead man switch scary? Or is it just like the nature of knowing other people's secrets? Like you just do it. I don't know.
I think that's a really interesting question. And I don't know. To be perfectly clear, I would love to put this question to Ross and Jeremy and George and ask them. My gut says it is not typical for investigative journalists to have to hold a blackmail threat over their subjects. I don't think that's normal. I think normally you have I am agreeing to protect my sources, and it's understood that a good journalist will go to the mat to avoid revealing their sources if they don't have to.
Yeah.
This is a little different, and I think it has to do with the nature of the material being discussed and the fact that people have, according to people we've heard from, been killed to protect this secret before. So if you were covering, mafia, maybe you got a similar thing. I'm going to report on a mafia boss's secrets, and that guy knows that it's better to let me publish what I have than to kill me, because if he kills me, more is going to come out that will be even worse. I don't know, but I also know most investigative journalists are not covering topics where the subject they're covering might try to kill them. Like I just listened to a really good podcast about the guys at ProPublica who received a leaked copy of all of the billionaires' tax returns.
Oh, man.
And they did 50 stories about the failure of the IRS to be able to audit rich people, the failures of our tax system, how we've ended up in this spot. But the IRS isn't going to whack you for doing that.
Right,
like they'll go after the whistleblower, they'll go after the leaker, but you as a journalist are not in any danger for publishing this, whereas revealing the name of a blacker than black UFO crash retrieval program, you might be. So I don't know. I think I always thought that this stuff was a little bit hyperbole. Oh, don't worry, I've got a dead man switch. Like, okay, you're not that important, man. Settle down. But I keep hearing people that I do take credibly including Ross Coulthart, talking about this and going, geez, maybe there's something to this. Like, it makes me take the stories about people being killed more seriously than I think I would, to see that the people who are neck deep in this take it extremely seriously to the point where they feel the need to protect themselves, right? You don't just see journalists coming out and telling stories right and left and doing nothing different. You see them coming out and taking publicly announced measures to shield themselves. That lends some weight to it. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's definite, but it makes it feel more plausible to me.
Yeah. Okay. So pretending for a minute that we actually knew anything that anyone cared about, what would be your dead man switch?
Oh, geez. I don't know. Like the secret ingredient in my chocolate chip cookie recipe.
Yes, exactly. I was just thinking about, like, what secrets do I know? Oh yeah, how to reprogram my keyboard. Like, I don't know.
My 1Password credentials probably is the real answer.
The only thing of value around here.
Right? Yeah. All right. So speaking of Immaculate Constellation, I got a couple of quick follow-up notes from last episode.
Cool.
So first of all, one of the things we talked about with Immaculate Constellation is it's a weird program name, right? Like, it sounds like Immaculate Conception. Is it meant to? Is that a coincidence? Why would you pick this name? Aren't they supposed to be random? It's a very strange name. So this one guy on Reddit, Bjamin75, said, it's actually kind of a funny name if you think about it. Immaculate means clean. Constellation means, well, it means stars in the night sky. This program gets first dibs on military sensor data before the data goes anywhere else. If there are any UFOs in that sensor data, they are immaculately scrubbed out of the picture or removed from the data stream so that you don't have any unsightly UFOs ruining otherwise nice pictures of constellations in the night sky.
That is a hilarious interpretation. So I remember we were talking on Wednesday, and you mentioned that DoD programs are usually like lumped under an umbrella program. Like the first word is the umbrella program. But or that it's somehow randomly created.
Yeah, and I should be clear, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but I did see, I think it was either Ryan Graves or Lieutenant Tim McMillan talking about, this is a weird program name. First of all, you're not supposed to pick program names that mean anything or reference anything in pop culture. They're supposed to sound random and made up. And you're definitely not supposed to do something that might kind of tip your hand of what the program is about. If it's a black program, you don't want someone to look at the name on a spreadsheet and go, oh, well, that must be the UFO program. But that said, first of all, I don't know if that's true. It makes sense. It tracks in my head, but I don't know it for a fact. And second of all, the whole point is we're dealing with an illegally concealed SAP. So it feels like anything's on the table. Like, I don't know if, maybe there is a standard set of rules that your SAPs are supposed to follow for picking program names. But if we're already dealing with a weird program under a weird bureaucracy, who knows if the rules still apply?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Now, the other thing we talk about is, of course, we immediately got a denial from the Pentagon. They said something along the lines of, we have no records of any programs using the word immaculate for any DoD program. Journalist Chris Sharp asked a really good question. He noted that the Pentagon did not respond when I asked them to confirm protocols should a legitimate, unacknowledged SAP be leaked to the press.
Yeah, that's a super interesting question, because like that he could be asking as a genuine, like, hey, if we heard something, what do you want me to do? Like,
well, what do you want me to do? But also, what is your protocol? Like, what does the Pentagon press secretary do when a legitimate program is leaked to the public?
Yeah.
Do you continue denying it even though it is now out in public? Now, what we learned about SAPs and unacknowledged SAPs is that yes, you are supposed to deny them. If you are talking to somebody who has learned the name of the program, you are explicitly supposed to lie to them and
Yeah.
tell them
Right.
it doesn't exist. Does that extend to the press secretary? Does that extend to when the journalists are the one asking? And
Yeah.
my bet is yes. It
Yeah.
feels like a
Probably.
gotcha because, like, well, they shouldn't be allowed to lie, but there's actually a bit of historical precedent here. Area 51 was
Mhm.
famously an unacknowledged thing for a long, long time. Even after everybody kind of knew it was a real thing,
Yeah.
it was still no such program, no such place.
Hmm.
This came to a head in either the 90s or the aughts.
Hmm.
Uh, when it was when Obama was president. I don't
Okay.
remember the details. I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
in a nutshell, some people who worked at Area 51 were exposed to toxic chemicals from burn pits.
Right.
If you know anything about how military bases work, the way they dispose of most things is through burn pits.
Hmm.
And those burn pits get everything from jet fuel to office equipment to, plastic, whatever. If you're working in a secret base in the middle of Nevada, you can't just have garbage pickup. So everything goes in the burn pit. But the people who work around those burn pits are exposed to toxic fumes. So there were a bunch of
Right. Yeah.
people who claimed they worked at Area 51 and they were all sick and they were suing the government, not just for money, but to get the
Yeah.
government to tell them what they were exposed to so they could be
Right.
properly treated for it. Because they
Oh
would
my
go to
God.
their doctors and the doctor's like, I have no idea how to treat you because I don't know what you were exposed to.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and it seemed like a slam dunk case, right? Who doesn't want to take care of the troops? These are
Yeah.
Air Force personnel and stuff. And no, the government said there's no such program, and they had the case dismissed
Yeah. Yeah. That's
because
interesting.
Area 51 doesn't exist. Now, this whole thing came to a head, and later on, Area 51 was acknowledged. But like, that is, to my mind, the clearest example of a case where the government should be able to say, okay, the proceedings of this court case are now secret and cannot be made public.
Hmm.
But yes, within the confines of this courtroom where we have sworn the judge and all the people here to
Right. Yeah.
secrecy, Area 51 is real. We were burning the following toxic chemicals. Let's take
Right.
care of these troops. No, they were like, fuck
Nope.
them.
Yeah.
So if
Interesting.
that's how they're willing to treat sick service members, it's not hard for me to imagine that the Pentagon press secretary is like, never heard of it. Like,
Yeah.
that's an
Yeah.
easy lie to tell.
Yeah. I was about to ask about whether you're supposed to lie under oath, and I think you hit the answer. No, the Pentagon just gets it dismissed. Like, let's not even get to that point.
Yeah. Now, we are getting into messy ethical territory here, right?
Yeah,
Because
of course.
the whole point of having a press secretary is we're supposed to be able to trust what they tell us. But if we
Mm.
now have a situation where there are scenarios where the press secretary is supposed to lie to us, what is the fucking point of having a press secretary? Because it calls everything they say into question. The instant we're talking about anything involving possibly secret programs, the press secretary can say nothing that we can trust. That's a bad situation to be in, and I'm really deeply uncomfortable with it. And I don't know if it's true, but we've got enough puzzle pieces lining up here that I start feeling really uncomfortable about it.
Yeah. I think that is a false assumption that that is the job of the press secretary.
Well,
Um,
yeah, that's true. That's true.
yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Moving along. Congressional hearings are coming up
Hey.
November 13th. We've heard about this.
Yeah.
First
It
of all,
didn't
I've
happen
got a
in
bit of
September after all.
yeah, I've got a bit of good news for you.
Okay.
Last time we talked about the Senate hearing, it was a quote from Senator Gillibrand that the Senate UAP hearing was definitely going to happen in September. And we recorded that on like September 30th or something. We
Yeah.
were like,
Um,
Anyway, Gillibrand was recently asked by Ask a Poll, and she confirmed that yes, it had in fact been moved to November. She said,
Okay.
yes, we are having it, and it is going to be an armed services hearing.
What does armed services hearing mean?
That is the committee in the Senate that will be holding the hearing. It's the one that
Oh, okay.
Gillibrand works on. And
Okay,
she's spoken about this a little bit. This is going to be like last time Gillibrand held a hearing. It's not going to be calling a bunch of witnesses up to talk to the American public. It's going to be calling the director of Arrow in to grill him about how he's doing, whether he has the resources he needs, having him, report about the work that he's been doing.
Okay.
That was when we gave her the nickname Mama Bear, was because she was grilling Kirkpatrick, who was relatively new to the job. And at the time, we were extending him a great deal of credit and assuming that he was being hamstrung by those above him. And she was asking some rather pointed questions. Are you receiving all the support you need from your chain of command? If not, I will make calls.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's interesting. It occurs to me now, she might have also been giving very clear like guardrails and setting up like, do you know who your actual boss is? Because it's me.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Now, switching over to the House, journalist Mike Disclosure reported that...
Wait, hang on. Are we really just going to blow by that name without any comment? Mike Disclosure?
Okay, I mean, obviously this is a pen name, right? I don't know the dude's real name. He works for a YouTube series called Disclosure Tonight. I tried looking him up. I couldn't find his real last name. This is the name he publishes under.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
So yeah, Mike Disclosure reported that the upcoming House Oversight Committee UAP hearing, which is the one that Representative Mace is supposed to chair that Burchett has been talking about, which is scheduled for November 13th, might be canceled. He says, quote, confidential sources within Congress have informed me that ranking members of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Representatives Mike Turner and Representative Jim Himes, are working with high-ranking members in the Pentagon to have the upcoming hearings canceled. The recent Michael Schellenberger article about the unacknowledged special the USAP Immaculate Constellation will be a focus in the upcoming UAP hearings on November 13th. We haven't heard that, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, right.
There are several witnesses with direct knowledge of this program who have come forward to Congress. Also news.
Yeah. One
of the witnesses is expected to testify about the program at the hearing. We haven't heard that from anybody.
Yeah.
The Pentagon, and so if all of that is true, this next sentence makes perfect sense. The Pentagon is trying to pressure Congress due to national security concerns to cancel the November 13th hearing. Representatives Turner and Representative Himes are backing the Pentagon in Congress about those concerns.
I mean, you know you're headed in the right direction when you see the resistance. So
I can tell you're into it because you're quoting Tim Burchett right now. Maybe not knowingly, but that is exactly what he says. He's like,
is it really?
You know that you're getting close when you can see the smoke.
I mean, what I wanted to say is, you're headed the right way when the bad NPCs are in front of you.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, this dude is the only one who reported this. The good news is we immediately got a bit of pushback on this. Ask a Poll reached out to Representative Nancy Mace, the chairwoman of the House Oversight Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, who said, she was the one who's supposed to chair this hearing. And she said, quote, come hell or high water, I'm holding a hearing.
All right, let's go. That's great.
All right. Ask a Poll also got a comment from Representative Himes, who said, quote, I know absolutely nothing about any of this. You should check with Turner, who's in the majority. As I think you know, one committee doesn't generally cancel another committee's hearings.
So I guess I don't understand this. Probably because I don't know who's on what committees. Are neither of them on the Oversight Committee? Or
I believe that is true. They're on the Intelligence Committee. Oversight is different. But we've got a little more clarity here. Another bit
Okay.
of confirmation that the hearing is happening. Douglas Dean Johnson was able to get a quote from an oversight committee spokesperson who said, "The Cyber Subcommittee and National Security Subcommittee will hold a joint hearing on UAPs on November 13th."
Right. Okay. So, but why the cyber committee?
That's such a good question. And somebody immediately responded and asked him that. And he said, "One might suppose that it is related to the high degree of interest in the subject that has been demonstrated by several of the majority party members of that subcommittee, including the chair," which is a fancy way of saying if you go look at who's on the cybersecurity subcommittee, it includes all but one member of the UAP caucus, Representatives
Okay.
Mace, Burchett, Moskowitz, Luna, and Burleson are all on the
I
cyber
see.
subcommittee.
I get it. Okay. So they're going to form a dadgum Voltron and force this hearing to happen.
Damn right.
Oh my God. Dadgum is just such a good phrase. I need to work this into my daily life.
It's excellent.
So, do we know anything about, like, you mentioned a lot of stuff from Mike Disclosure. Do we have any, like, confirmation about the witnesses from someone else?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Like I said, everything Mike D said about they're going to talk about Immaculate Conception. Multiple witnesses have come forward to Congress. At least one of the whistleblowers will be called to testify. All of that is news. We haven't heard that from anybody involved in the hearing. In fact, when people have asked about witnesses, Representative Burchett has said, "We're trying to get some good witnesses there, but we don't want to break them out too early like we did last time, and then they get squashed."
Okay, so, like, is he implying that they had other whistleblowers who were threatened and then pulled out of the last hearings?
That's what he said last time. So last time
Okay.
we ended up with Ryan Graves, David Fravor, and David Grush, all of whom were already public whistleblowers. Or public witnesses, I guess I should say. Graves and Fravor aren't whistleblowers. But none of them had anything to gain by concealing themselves. They were already out.
Right.
There were supposed to be, according to Burchett, further witnesses being called who backed out at the last minute, allegedly because they were pressured by the Pentagon to do so.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. Now, in terms of who we might know is going to testify, first of all, I've already reported this, but just to confirm, Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet said, "Yesterday I was invited to testify on UAP disclosure before the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Accountability in November."
Ooh, sweet. Gonna get some sweet wet alien action.
Oh, please, no. Wet sciences I can barely get behind. Wet aliens, no. Say USO,
No. Okay.
man. Stick
Okay,
to this.
USOs. All right.
All right. And then the other one, which is new information, a little more exciting. Lou Elizondo said, "There is a chance I may be testifying here soon. I won't go into details, but in an earlier interview, he was asked point blank, 'Have you been asked to testify at the upcoming hearing? And if asked, would you?' And Lou responded, 'Yes and yes.' So I take that as confirmation. Lou has also been invited to testify."
Yeah, that'd be awesome. But he's also done the rounds so much lately. I feel like it would be great to have him there, but we kind of already have this info.
Yeah, I think there's a couple directions this hearing could go. So one is going back to what Matthew Pines said about this year is not about bigger and newer whistleblowers. It's about higher credibility people coming out and adding credibility to what David Grush has already said. David Grush already dropped the bombs.
Yeah,
now we're just hammering on them, more and more people, right? Getting a rear admiral, getting the former director of the Pentagon UFO program is a step up from David Grush, the whistleblower, and 2 Navy pilots. So there's a world where you can see we're just hammering on this point. We're going to keep going and make sure that the American public is getting we're not backing down on this. David Grush wasn't a weird anomaly. There's
Yeah.
more evidence supporting this.
Cool.
But again, Mike Disclosure is the only person who has said this, but it makes perfect sense that Immaculate Constellation would be a topic, right?
Yeah.
Michael Schellenberger was very clear that the whistleblower had already testified to Congress. In fact, the 27-page document that he talked about, they said they had given that report to Congress. It would not be surprising to see that whistleblower, or at least the contents of that report, be part of the discussion. But nobody involved in the hearing has actually said that. So take that with a grain of salt. It makes sense. I think it tracks, but it is also a little different than, if we're going to be talking about Immaculate Constellation, what is Tim Gallaudet doing there? What is Lou Elizondo? On the other hand, I felt the same way when they announced that David Fravor, Ryan Graves, and David Grush were going to testify, because one of these things is not like the other.
Yeah.
Ryan Graves and David Fravor, very by the book military pilots. I was in my jet plane, as I am paid to do by the American military, and I saw something weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Very credible witness. David Grush, hey guys.
Definitely
Did
not that.
you hear that there was a UFO recovered in 1933 by the Vatican? I love David Grush, but he was making some wild claims there. And it seemed crazy to me that the Pentagon, that Congress, who is still kind of trying to thread the relatability line here, would have taken that plunge. But they did. So maybe this is going to be the same kind of thing. And we'll have Tim Gallaudet stand up and say, yeah, we saw this giant USO go by an oil platform. And we'll get Lou Elizondo come out and say, I ran the government program and I know that there's a crash retrieval program. And then we'll have the whistleblower come up and say, I worked on Immaculate Constellation, illegally hiding UFO information from the rest of the military, including Congress. Seems like a step, but maybe. Maybe.
Could be.
We'll see.
Very exciting. Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but November 17th is my birthday. And so I'm hoping this will tee up really nicely.
Yeah. Actually, this raises an interesting point. We have to talk. We'll do this offline after this, but when we're going to record the next episode, because technically we're up for recording the next episode on the 10th. It's a few days before the congressional hearing. I kind of wonder if we should just delay and record after, but then we're recording in the middle of the week, which is, anyway, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
For the listeners, don't worry. We are definitely going to talk about the congressional hearing. I just don't know exactly on what day you'll get that recording from us.
I imagine this is going to be one of those ones where we do an extra recording on a Saturday or something. But
maybe, yeah. So continuing with the topic of witnesses, journalist Jeremy Corbell said, quote, I've just returned from several productive in-person meetings and briefings in Washington, D.C., engaging directly with numerous members of Congress and key committees involved in the UAP issue. And I can confirm that we are firmly on the right track as we move towards the upcoming UAP hearings. All parties are working tirelessly to shape these proceedings for maximum impact with a clear focus on public knowledge and transparency. Representative Mace made it crystal clear when she stated, I need people who have maybe seen some shit and can tell us some stuff. And that is precisely what she and other members will receive. I have personally facilitated introductions between whistleblowers and members of Congress to ensure that. UAP disclosure is a complex dance, but the music has been playing for a long time, and now people are finally stepping onto the dance floor.
Amazing analogy. I like the idea of maximum impact on the dance floor. Will the esteemed lady from South Carolina please drop the bass? Exactly. Oh, I love your air horn noises. Okay, more seriously though, what does he actually mean by maximum impact there?
Yeah. Well, you remember I was talking about how Corbell likes to kind of like dance around, like, I know more than I'm telling you, but one way or another, this shit's coming out, right? Corbell said, quote, if people's names are not leaked, if information isn't leaked, I have
What?
no idea if that came through on the microphone, but the
Uh,
loudest rip of thunder just went by outside.
oh, you never get thunder over there.
No,
That's
very
exciting.
rarely. Anyway, if people's names are not leaked, if information is not leaked, the world will learn about it on November 13th. There is a way in which the world is 100%, no stopping it, going to learn about it on November 13th for the congressional hearings. Now, there's a dramatic way that can happen and an undramatic way. If anybody were to fuck with witnesses or us or anybody involved, it's going to be dramatic. And we don't want that. We want the information out. And if it's the dramatic way, then all of a sudden other people are coming forward too.
Is it wrong that I kind of want the dramatic way? Like,
No.
I'm sort of imagining like high drama, like the musical episode of Strange New Worlds. Like maybe Lou or Nolan is singing the part of Uhura. Burchett and Luna are in the engineering bay. Like, no spoilers, but I'm wondering who would play the special gold-plated auto-tuned role in the middle of the musical.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
That was a good freaking episode.
So good.
Yes. Oh, man. So that's where we're at, Chuck. That's the current happenings in the UFO world. We've got
I'm getting
congressional
hyped.
hearings imminently.
Yeah.
According to Jeremy Corbell, shit is going down one way or another on the 13th. So we'll see. We'll see.
God, we've got a big month coming up.
We do. We do. Yeah. And I also need to start prepping for, I need to vote like this weekend. Like,
yeah, you do.
After I'm done here. Yeah. That's on my list. Yeah, there's a lot of shit going on. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about the presidential election, but yeah, that's a whole other thing that's happening.
I mean, that's kind of important.
no big deal.
So I had to look up earlier. I was like, what would happen if Mace actually isn't reelected? And I looked at the polling numbers, and Mace is totally going to get reelected. But
there's that, but also Congress is still in session in November, like the current group. So Congress, I forget when they rotate out, but it's like the president thing, right? Like the elections on November, the new president doesn't actually come in until February or whatever. So I think Congress is the same thing. They've got that kind of lame duck session there at the end. And that might be why they punted this stuff to after the presidential election is, who can stop us?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. GPT says that it's January 3rd of the following year. So
okay, that makes sense. So yeah, we've still got some time with the current group of senators, and the corollary to that is the UAP Disclosure Act. People were talking about it coming up in this year's NDAA, and it still doesn't look great, but we still haven't heard it is dead. Like until they sign the ink on the final version, technically it still could happen. It's just increasingly unlikely the further we go along. But I did see some people talking about that it was always kind of a long shot because Congress hasn't changed since last year when they shot it down. The president hasn't changed. So like what would have been different now? The people who objected to it last year are all still there. Next year's NDAA, in theory, is a new Congress, in theory, a new president. Maybe, well, I guess we get a new president either way, but we may see some institutional change, and who knows? Maybe we get some drama, according to Jeremy Corbell, after November 13th, and that affects the UAP Disclosure Act.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll see like that exact drama on like November 5th or something.
That would be real interesting.
Who knows? Anyways.
Oh man.
Yeah.
It's
exciting times.
Wild, huh? Yeah. Okay. Ooh. Thank you all for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our Discord and social media accounts.
And you can feel free to email us at Scott or Chuck at veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.